Hello and welcome, everybody. It is a pleasure to introduce you to a brand new course. It is June. It's a brand new month, and you get 10 points for being awake at 9 a.m. Montreal time. Wherever else you may be tuning in from, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce our newest teacher to the faculty, and that is Sara Susswein Tesler. Sara teaches Tanakh and Jewish thought to adults and post-high school students in Israel. She holds an MA in Bible from the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies at YU, studied Jewish law at many yeshivot in Israel and the US. And when not teaching, Sara can be found immersed in architectural design or spending time in nature. I'd like to add on a personal note that I have become a friend of Sara's this year. We met one another. I've been fortunate enough to learn from her, to participate in classes by her. And Sara is a wonderful and gifted teacher. And when I was listening to her teach Torah, I said to myself, my goodness, we have to invite her to be a new faculty member at the Shah Learning Center. And hopefully you will see and agree with me, the proof will be in the pudding. Without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Sara as we will be beginning a study of the Book of Devarim, the Book of Deuteronomy. And she is going to take us on an entire journey. And without any further ado, I will let her speak and give matters in her own words. It's my pleasure to introduce Sara Susswein Tesler. Please.
Thank you, Mark. That was really kind. Thank you. It's really my pleasure to be learning with you guys. The only request I have is that you guys interrupt me. I'm serious about that. I have a tendency to just keep on going and going. So please hold up your hand, unmute yourself if you have any questions or comments. It's really my pleasure to be learning Torah with you, especially Sefer Devarim, which happens to be my most favorite Sefer. And I hope that through our study, you will come to appreciate it in a whole new way. And I know it's up against a lot. It's, it's not Bereshit. It doesn't have all the really interesting, mythological stories of Gan Eden or, developments of the Avot. It's not Shmot. We don't have the Exodus. We don't have Har Sinai. We don't have a lot of that. Vayikra, we could probably beat Vayikra. It's kind of boring. Not a lot going on there. And Bamidbar has some interesting stories. But Devarim, when you typically hear about Devarim, what is it? It's just a speech. It doesn't really arouse that much passion from people. Most people don't love Sefer Devarim. There's really no drama. There are no great new stories. There's just a lot of theology, which is why I love it. I love philosophy, and I love learning philosophy from the Torah. And I think that Sefer Devarim, through our study, you're going to see, actually offers a radical, innovative philosophy that we don't see in any of the other books. So before I give too much away, let's just dive right into it and see. Now, we're lucky that Sefer Devarim is the only book that actually gives itself its own introduction to the book. We don't have that anywhere else. Let's take a look at the introduction of Sefer Devarim, okay? I have the psukim here in Hebrew and English. I'm going to read them briefly as I explain them, and I want you to think about all the problems or questions that you have about this introduction. Ela hadvarim asher diber Moshe al kol Yisrael be'ever hayarden. These are the words that Moshe spoke to Bnei Israel while he was standing on beyond the Jordan River. That means that he's standing on the eastern side of the Jordan. If you look at the map over here, that little arrow, somewhere in that area. Bamidbar, Barava, Musuf, Ben Parano, Ben Topel, Velavan, V'chetzro, B'tizahav. We don't really know what these places are talking about. And then it tells us an interesting detail. Achadasar Yom Michorev, Derech Har Seir, Ad Kadesh Barnea. It was an 11-day journey from Chorev, which we know is Har Sinai, until Kadesh Barnea, which is where Chet Meraglim happened. This seems to be a little irrelevant for our story right here. And now it gets to where we are. Vayihi ba'arba'im shana. And now we're finally in the 40th year. We're at the end. We made it, right? Bashtei chodesh v'chad l'chodesh. Ziber Moshe el b'nei Israel kachol asher tziva Adonai oto alehem. Moshe is now going to tell them everything that God had commanded him. And when did this happen? This is Acharei Hakoto et Sichon Melech Homeri Asher Yoshev Becheshbon v'et Og Melech Bashan Asher Yoshev B'Ashdod Be'Edrei. This is after Moshe had conquered Sichon and Og, who live in this region over here. We see Ammon and we see the kingdom of Og. So this is really at the tail end, right before Moshe is about to die. This is his last will and testament, the last speech that he gives to Bnei Israel. So it's here, Be'ever HaYarden, Be'eretz Moav, Ho'il Moshe, Bi'er et HaTorah Hazot Limor, that Moshe begins to teach, to expound this Torah. Now, if this introduction makes no sense to you or is very confusing, please raise your hand. Come on, guys. I'm not the only one, okay? If you're driving, you don't have to raise your hand. Know that you are not alone. This is a really confusing introduction, right? The narrator is telling us that what we are about to read in this book are the exact words that Moshe gave over to Bnei Israel while he was standing there. And then it had all this extra information, which honestly, it makes no sense. Mefarshim try to deal with it and try to understand what it's talking about. Are these places where Moshe taught them this Torah? Are they places where Bnei Israel sinned? Are they actual places? Are they just references? We don't know. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this today's talk because I want to get through so much. So we'll just leave it at that it's really confusing. Why does it tell us it's an 11-day journey from Horeb, from Har Sinai to Kadesh Barnea? Again, that happened 38 years ago. So why are we suddenly being drawn back 38 years and then we're being transported to the 40th year? It's very strange. I think that the general idea here that it's trying to tell us is that Sefer Devarim is the bridge between the journey in the Midbar and what comes next, the conquest. It's almost like suspended in time and place. It's at this pivotal moment in Jewish history, we're about to embark on a new phase. And this is where it's happening. Now, I just spoke about all the unnecessary information it did give us, but can anyone tell me what information is missing from this introduction? What would you have supposed the narrator would also have said in his introduction to the book? I'm going to call it a him because I'm guessing a man wrote it because that was more common. What would you have liked to have heard from this narrator in these first 5 opening psukim?
Interesting. I would have said some sort of mise en scène. I don't know how to say that in English quickly, but a presentation, a kind of almost a hint of what is to come.
Yes, right. Something about like, what is the book going to be about? What type of laws is Moshe going to present, right? Like, give us a little bit, like, what book are we opening? A philosophical book, a legal book, a history book, right? Tell us what's happening here.
There's no setting of the scene.
Right. There's a setting of the space and the time. That's
Yeah.
what there is. We know we're at this pivotal moment in time and we know where we're standing, but we don't know what we're about to read.
Right.
Yes. What else is missing from this? If you were a narrator, if you're writing a book, right? And you're hoping this is going to become a bestseller.
There's nothing either about everyone that's gathered there. Who's the audience?
So who's the audience of his book, the narrator's book, not the audience of Moshe's speech, right? Because
Right.
Moshe's speech, we know the audience is Bnei Israel standing there, but who is this narrator writing this book for precisely? I'm going to expand that a little more. Who is this mysterious anonymous narrator, right? Who decided to put together this book of Moshe's speeches? We know absolutely nothing about him. It seems a little strange, right? Aren't you curious who decided to come ahead and do this?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know. Yes. Sorry, were you going to speak again? No, okay. We don't know, but I think that we have some clues throughout the text that we could start gathering and put together a little sketch of who he might be, okay? And this is just a tiny sketch of who this narrator is. We know from our introduction that we just read that he refers to Moshe standing be'ever HaYarden, on the other side of the Jordan, which tells us, where's this narrator standing? He's standing on the western side, right? Like, I'm going to go back to that map again. Hold on, right? He must be standing somewhere here because he's referring to the other side of the Jordan River. Okay, so that's clue number one, where he is at least. Lucky for us, this narrator also wrote the conclusion to the book. Okay, so he wrote an intro and a conclusion. And let's take a look at that conclusion to the book, what he wrote. Okay, he actually writes about Moshe's death. And he writes that Moshe went up to Har Nevo, okay, and he's looking out at Yericho, and he sees the entire land in front of him, right, everything. And God says, this is the land that I gave to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and to your children. And then Pasuk Hey in the middle, Vayamat Sham Moshe Eved Adonai be'eretz Moab al pi Adonai. Moshe dies. Ve'ikbor tov begai be'eretz Moab mul Beit Peor v'lo yada ish et gburato ad hayom hazeh. He dies, and we have no idea. That information is lost. We don't know where it is. And Moshe was 120 years old, and Bnei Israel cry, and it's very sad. And then Pasuk Tet, Yehoshua comes, and he gets the spirit, and he takes over. And then the narrator ends off with this beautiful poetic flourish, and he says, "V'lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'mo Moshe, asher yado Adonai panim el panim." There has never been another navi in all of history like Moshe, who spoke to God panim el panim, and who did all the otot and the moftim, and who took us out of Mitzrayim, like this miracle worker and this incredible person, right? So here the narrator is giving us some other clues. What could we deduce from his conclusion more about when he lived? I mean, it's not a lot of specific knowledge, but we know that he's living very, very, very long after Moshe's life, because no one knows where he was buried. That information has become lost. He talks about Yehoshua accepting the mantle of leadership. So this must be after Yehoshua. And then he has the audacity to say that no one has ever been like Moshe. Now, what type of person can say that? If he's saying that there hasn't been another Navi like Moshe, what do we know about him? That he's lived through a long period of history where there have been many Nevi'im, and none of those Nevi'im could come close to Moshe, right? Only someone who's lived very far after the event could make a statement like that. So we know that he's living far, far away from Moshe's time, probably sometime after even, like all the major Nevi'im lived, because he seems pretty sure of himself about that. And we see that also throughout Sefer Devarim, we're going to see him constantly referring to the fact that the land is already settled. That's the third source I got for you here, Perek Bet, and I could have brought 10 other sources from Devarim that says, Kasher Asa Yisrael le'eretz Yerushato, that they settled the land, that just like Bnei Israel settled down the land. So this shows us that he's living at a time after the land was already settled. And we know from Sefer Yehoshua that took many, many years, close to 100 years at least. So from all of this, we see that this narrator is way, way, way far away from Moshe's time. Modern scholarship places this book being authored in the late 7th century. And through our study, we're going to see that makes perfect sense, because we're going to see a lot of parallels between Sefer Devarim and Assyrian treaties and texts that parallel that time period. So the late 7th century seems to fit in with, this time period very nicely. So what is this narrator saying? He's coming and saying, I am putting together a book a few hundred years later, but it's not my book. I'm just writing down the words of the famous Navi Moshe, right? Now, this is a great way to get people to read your book. Really, really smart to say, this is not my book. This is all Moshe's. People do this all the time. This isn't new. People would constantly, in the ancient Near East, it was very common to attribute your book to another author in order to get more readership. It's not like today where you actually want to put your name on a book because then you're going to get royalties and get paid. They're not getting paid anyway. They just want to make sure their work is read. So they want to put a famous name. Lots of examples. For example, in Sefer Ezra, when talking about some of the temple laws, it says, this is all written in Torah Moshe, except it's not in Torah Moshe. We don't see any of those laws there. But Ezra needed to say it was written in Torah Moshe in order to give the law a little more weight, right? Like, don't worry, guys, this is ancient law. This was a long time ago. Another example is like the Book of Jubilees, a Second Temple period literature that begins by saying, this is the book that Moshe got at Har Sinai. So there are lots of books been written about that. Even within rabbinic literature, we have this concept of halacha mi Moshe mi Sinai, right? That we have a law and it can be traced all the way back. This is what Moshe got at Har Sinai. And I personally don't always take that phrase literally. I think it's about an idea of continuation and in the spirit of the law. I'm sure some people do take it literally, but I think it's the same idea that we attribute things to people in order to give it, a more serious gravitas to the text. In this class, I am going to go with the narrator's assertion that these are Moshe's words. Whether I know these are actually Moshe's words or not is irrelevant for me, because we're going to work within the story truth of the book. We're going to work within the system that the narrator wants us to operate in. Okay? So we're not going to get hung up on, did the narrator actually write these words and say that they're Moshe's or not? Doesn't matter. Let's just talk as if Moshe actually gave this speech in Arvot Moav as his last will and testament before he died. Okay? Any questions on that before we move on? I can't see everyone in my screen, so if you ever have a question or you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, don't wave because I see that I can't see everyone. Let's return to the introduction again. Okay, let's go back there. So Moshe is standing in the 40th year in Moab, and he begins to give this Bi'er eta Torah hazot. He expounds on this Torah. What Torah are we talking about? If I ask you guys, what is the definition of Torah? What would you say? Just throw it out. What does Torah mean?
What was received at Mount Sinai.
Yes, I think that's what most people would say. The Torah, and what are you actually referring to? What's your conception of that?
The events where Moshe went up to the mountain, spoke with God, descended, and displayed the 10 Commandments.
Right. Exactly, right? So we would assume, I think if you ask most people, what does Torah mean? They would say it's the 5 books of the Torah or the events at Har Sinai. Though today we also use the word Torah to talk about everything within Torah, right? The Gemara, the Mishnah, Halacha, Jewish philosophy. We use the word Torah as anything Jewish. But I think it's really important to remember as we study together that within Sefer Devarim, Torah has a very specific meaning, okay? And I am not going to read through every single one of these sources. And again, I only brought a few. There were many more, okay? I don't want to bore you with all the small details, but you have to trust me on this, that every single time that the Sefer Devarim uses the word Torah, it's self-referential. It's talking about its own law that it is giving, okay? It's never actually referring to a previous book. So when Moshe is giving over this Torah, he is giving over this law book that is going to be called the Torah, okay? So just keep that in mind because we're going to have that word show up over and over again. Now, I'm sure many people here have heard Sefer Devarim referred to as Mishnah Torah. That is the rabbinic name, right? Which is where it gets the English name Deuteronomy in Latin, which means a second law. Because I think if you actually stop most people on the street who who thought about this or who know about Torah and ask them, what is Sefer Devarim? They'll say, it's a repetition. It's a repeat of the entire Torah. That's sort of the common answer that people give. But really, nothing could be further from the truth. There's actually hardly any repetition in Sefer Devarim. And in the places where there is repetition, the repetition is really bad repetition. Moshe gets all the details wrong, okay? But really, Sefer Devarim is all new law, and it's new theology. It's theology we haven't seen before. And so from now on, I would like to also move away from calling this book a repetition, right? It even bothers me it's called a Mishnah Torah. It really, really isn't. So based on what I said so far, what do we know about this book? Well, we know that it's written by a man, not God, okay? It's a human book. We know that it's Moshe's personal perspective. We finally got to see his version of the events. We are going to see that Moshe is going to make his own hierarchy of mitzvot. He's going to tell us what does he think is really important and what's not so important based on what he emphasizes. For example, I'll just throw it out now. He hardly mentions any karbanot or any ritual that is done in the mikdash, but he does really focus a lot on how to create an ethical society. And we're going to see Moshe's theology. He has a different idea about where does God reside? Does God have a body? How does God relate to the people? And it's very different than anything we've seen in any books before. Now, I drew out this nice introduction for you guys to look at. Okay, take a look at this sheet. You ready? This is going to be the outline of what we are going to do together. We have the introduction, which we are doing today. Okay, so we did the narrator's introduction to Moshe's speech. We're going to see right now how Moshe recounts some past events that happened 38 years ago, like the appointment of the judges and the spies. We're going to talk about how he recounts some more modern history that just happened a few months ago, like the conquest of the Eastern Jordan side. We're going to see how Moshe begs to enter the lands. And then if we have time, we'll see some warnings to the future. And then Sefer Devarim has three main speeches. Speech number 1 focuses on Har Sinai, the Brit at Har Sinai, and all the theology around keeping the mitzvot and the 10 commandments. Let's jump ahead now to speech 3. Okay, jump ahead. You'll see it's a beautiful direct parallel to speech 3, where again, there's a covenant. And this is a future covenant that's going to be at Har Gerizim and Har Ival. So this is called a beautiful chiastic structure. In the middle, the center of Sefer Devarim, okay, the most important part is the Torah section, and that's the law section, which is broken up into 3 distinct categories: mitzvot, chukim, and mishpatim. Mitzvot are duties of the heart. They're how we feel towards God, most famously the Shema. So these are feelings of love and devotion. Chukim are rituals. Rituals are modes of worship, things that we do because God said to do them, even if we don't know why we're doing them. For example, temple law. And lastly, mishpatim, from the word mishpat, okay, which is justice. These are universal ethical laws relating to how to create a moral society. So that's the 3 main sections right smack inside of the book. Then Moshe concludes with his 3rd speech, which parallels the first speech, and we'll see a lot of similarities between them. And last, the conclusion. Just like Moshe began with talking about the past events, he's going to conclude with talking about the future. And that's going to be about the transfer of power and giving brachot to each tribe and giving them inspiration to go on without him. And just like the narrator had an introduction, we also saw before that the narrator has a conclusion at the end. And that's why Sefer Devarim is the most beautiful book. I think this is why I love it so much. I love structure. I love neat text. It's gorgeous. You guys see the beauty in the structure. where we could really follow along and tackle each section on its own. So this was all the introduction, guys. Yeah.
Are you going to provide us with this particular slide?
Mm-hmm. Sure, I could send this to everyone, 100%. It's a great slide to have. I'm
Good.
actually, yes,
Sarah
I'm
has
happy.
very kindly sent on ahead of the class all of these materials, and I can happily email it to everyone immediately following. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good.
And I'm going to begin every lecture with this slide so that we could see exactly where we are. So for today, we're going to do the whole introduction, and then we're going to do like speech 1, and then speech probably 2 and 3 together, and then the conclusion, something like that. So we'll slowly move through the entire book. So by the end of this series, you will have a really great overview of the entire book of Devarim and understand what it's trying to do. So let's finally learn the book. Let's get into it. Let's see what Moshe's speech is. Let's begin. That was a long-winded introduction. Remember, I said before that Moshe finally has an opportunity to present himself to the people through his own eyes, right? How does he view himself? What's his self-perception? Now, we know from the other books in the Torah, right, from Shmot and Bamidbar, Moshe is always the object of the story. Someone else is writing the story about him. And in these other books, he begins by being this unknown identity, right? Mysterious birth. We're not sure, is he Egyptian? Is he Israelite? He's kind of on the border between the two. But he has this innate sense of justice, and he goes and he kills the Mitzri. And did he do the right thing? Is he a hero? Well, it's very cynical, but like the Israelites actually don't thank him. They actually say, great, now you made things worse for us. So he becomes an anti-hero in a sense. He out of despair, he runs away, he escapes, he doesn't want to be the hero. But God pulls him out and gives him these superpowers where he's going to become a miracle worker. And through this new superpower, this new reemergence of him, he manages to become the savior, and he turns into a leader, right? Now, he might have become too much of a leader, or that people rely on him and mistake him for taking them out of Egypt, which leads to Chet HaEgel, which was disastrous for Moshe. They think that he took them out, and they basically say, oh no, we need to make another Moshe. And after that, his leadership is challenged throughout the Midbar. I guess that's the sign of a good leader, where you're not a dictator, where Bnei Israel have the ability to challenge him. And it's not easy. Moshe goes through a really, really hard time. You feel bad for him. This pattern follows the classic hero pattern that we see in many ancient and also a lot of modern works of art. I'm sure many of us right now could think of books that we've read that follows the same, arc of this hero, doubting himself and then coming back and having a superpower. Indeed, throughout history, we see that Moshe does take on this persona of a god. We don't have time to survey the literature. I had to cut this part out, but it's fascinating that we see from late Greek times through the Second Temple, we see a lot of documents that refer to Moshe as a god or an angel or something like otherworldly. We see this in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. But how does Moshe see himself? Not who the man who he became or who he's right or how we view him. How does he view himself? And for that, I would like to start Sefer Devarim right now and pick off right after that introduction that we read before with the very next pasuk, and begins Moshe's speech at this mountain in Moab. So what does Moshe say? Okay, we're starting now in Perek Aleph. Moshe begins by saying that God spoke to us at Har Sinai, Chorev, and he said to them, Rav lechem sheva b'har hazeh. Okay, you've been here too long. You've been in Har Sinai for a long time. Turn around, we're going to go into the land. Let's start going. So you get really excited here in the text, right? We're like on a high. Yes, we're going to go into the land. Woohoo, things are looking really good. But then Moshe says, at that very moment, I said, Lo uchal livadi seitatchem. No, I can't do this. I can't carry you guys. God, thank God, made you guys so numerous. Look, you guys are like thousands of people. Eicha eseh levadi. How can one person possibly handle this whole burden of such a large nation? And so I told you guys that we need to have shoftim or zakenim, right? We need to get some other leadership. And pasuk yud dalid vata'anu oti vatamru, you b'nai Israel answered me and said, Tov hadavar asher dibarta la'asot. Oh, Moshe, that's a very good idea, said the people. We like your idea, Moshe. Let's go ahead and do it. And then Moshe goes on and appoints leaders. Okay.
Hi.
This is very strange.
I'm not muted.
Any questions that we have here?
Yes. Was it not Moses's father-in-law at some point who told him that he had too much on his plate and needed
Thank you.
to share?
Thank you. He leaves out Yitro, his father-in-law, who's the one who came up with this idea. Okay. Furthermore, in that story, Yitro makes this suggestion before Har Sinai, and here Moshe is giving it after Har Sinai. So those are two strange things. Any other questions? I'm going to ask a much broader question. Okay, I'm going to take a step back from here and say, why does Moshe even need to tell them the story of how he appointed judges? Because they have the judges, they see the judges, they're already part of their life. Why is it so important that he shares about how this happened? If I were beginning Sefer Devarim, if I was Moshe, and I'm writing down my history, my last will and testament, where would you begin the story? Pretend you're Moshe for a moment. Where would your tale start?
It would
Where
start
he was
all the way
born.
back in Egypt.
In Egypt, right?
Okay.
I was born an Egyptian, and you should know we were slaves in Mitzrayim, especially since these people don't know that story. Okay, we have to remember he's speaking to the second generation. None of them lived through that story of being slaves in Egypt, or maybe they were young kids, because everyone who was 20 and above has died out in the Midbar. So here's Moshe's chance to give them a great historical record of their entire life, and Yetziat Mitzrayim and Kriyat Yamsuf and right Har Sinai, and instead he begins by saying, "Oh, guys, after Har Sinai, I just couldn't do the job. I wasn't up for it. I wasn't strong enough, and so I had this idea for judges, and you thought it was a great idea, so we appointed judges." I can't think of anything more boring to begin a book with. Do you agree with me? What do you think? Right? Now we hear you. Yeah, you unmuted yourself. You could speak now.
Agreed.
Agree. You agree, right? It's really odd and strange, right? Why is he starting here? Any guesses before we move on? Mark, feel free to chime in. Why is it so important?
Maybe.
So that he's not the number one, I think. He's
Yes.
not the one and only.
Exactly. He has essentially written himself out of the story.
That's
He has
interesting.
totally taking himself out of the story. There's nothing about Mitzrayim. There's nothing about how special he is. In fact, I would say he almost presents himself as an I don't know, inept leader, as someone who can't really do the job. Right? He says, "Lo uchal livadi seitat chaim." I'm not that great. I can't do it alone. I need
Disagree.
help.
What jumps out, if I can interrupt you, Sarah, sorry.
Please go.
Only because you invited me in. What jumps out at me is that maybe a different approach could be, I'm here to tell you the most important part of the story, which isn't necessarily Egypt. It's not necessarily yesterday. It's not where we came from. It's rather the law, following the law.
I'm going to say something else. It's not just the law, it's shared leadership when it comes to the law.
Right, exactly.
Right?
That's
That's
exactly
what it is.
what I mean. And it's
Right.
not, and I'm not going to be here tomorrow. This is my conclusion. And so find who is the leader of, whether it's the captain of thousands, captain of hundreds, captain of 50s, because what he wants to emphasize is we need to follow the law, and the leader who's going to be the representative of that law after I'm no longer here.
I'm going to take it one step forward. What type of leader is Moshe? He's a leader who asks for their opinion and waits for them to give permission. They have to say, Tov hadavar asher diberta lasot. Yes, Moshe, we accept your idea. He's a leader who's very responsive and who works in a system, a framework of shared leadership. And I think you're right that he's saying that I'm about to die. So your next leader, you shouldn't look for a leader who's going to be flashy and does nisim and who like does all these magical, amazing things like Kriyat Yamsuf. That's not what a leader is. His entire identity as a leader is someone who's responsive, first of all, who knows himself, who can admit when he needs help. So he has the humility to say, I can't do something, I need help, asks for permission, waits for Bnei Israel to respond, and then does it in a shared fashion. That's what you need to do in order to create a just society. And that's the very first lesson that he gives them when starting his speech, knowing he's about to die. It's probably the most important thing.
In the context of the Middle East at that time, this entire approach is beyond revolution.
It's radical. It's totally radical.
Absolutely the antithesis of everything that was going on.
100%. This is unbelievably radical for this time period for a leader to be putting himself out there like this and presenting this political philosophy of shared leadership and the need for leaders to be accountable. And he's going to continue with this. I want you to look at the very, very next story. He continues right after by saying, right after that, we left Har Sinai. We were supposed to go into the lands. Oh, but we had a little detour because we had the Chet and the Meraglim. Okay? Because God says, go into the lands. And then Pasuk Chaf Bet, Batzikrevun alai el kulchem. You guys came to me. It was your idea. And you said, let us send spies. Again, how is this different than the story that was presented in Shlach? Whose idea was it before to send the spies? It was God's. And here it's the people. And look again in Chaf Gimel. Vayithav be'enai hadavar. Oh, I thought this was a good idea. I listened to you guys. Again, we have this like shared leadership. We have a partnership. So then I appointed one person from every one of these shvatim, and you guys went. I had to cut the text because it was too long here. But Moshe says that they went, they spied, they came back, and he doesn't put the blame on the spies. They didn't do anything wrong. It's actually all the people's fault. The people freaked out. They were too scared. They didn't want to go into the land. And so God punished them. And then look what Moshe does in the bottom, Pasuk Lamed Zayin. Gam bi hit anaf Adonai biglalchem lemor, gam ata lo tavo sham. I was also punished along with you that I can't go into the lands. Now, hold on a second. Why did we think up until now that Moshe is not allowed to go into the lands? What was he punished from? Does anyone recall? It was another sin, and nothing to do with Chet Meraglim.
He hit the rock.
He had to do with him hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock. Exactly. But no. Here Moshe is saying, I was part of this moral failing to get the people into the lands. I'm part of Chet Meraglim. And Yehoshua ben Nun, you have to strengthen him because only he can go into the lands. So this is wild. Again, we see the exact same thing happening. Moshe changes the details to show that he's responsive to their requests, right? And that he was part of the problem. He's very self-deprecating here, that this was my issue. It wasn't just Bnei Israel. And the focus is on shared leadership. And he's even saying he's flawed, right? I'm not perfect. I'm not a perfect leader. The next parak, the next two prakim, I did not put on the text because there were too many psukim. So instead, I just put a map. He then goes on to describe how they just conquered this entire land of Sichon and Og, okay, over here. And he's jumping ahead. He starts off by saying, let me tell you about what happened 38 years ago in the second year of the Midbar. And now let me tell you about what happened in the 40th year in the Midbar just a few weeks ago. Now, what is strange about Moshe telling them about the conquest of Ever HaYarden that just happened a few weeks ago? What's weird about that?
No,
They would all know it. They
They were
lived,
just there.
they just lived it 2
They
weeks.
literally just experienced it. There's nothing new in hearing about the conquest of Ever HaYarden. They probably still have the battle scars, right? They might even still be in their warrior clothing. They've just lived through a war. Why on earth is he taking out precious time from his major speech to then go through the most recent history that they just experienced? Right? It's mind-boggling. And what I would like to propose, okay, is that what Moshe is doing here is creating a parallel between their parents' generation and themselves. He's saying, your parents, they were the ones who sinned at Chet Meraglim because they were afraid. You just succeeded in conquering Ever HaYarden. And he's basically saying, you are not your parents. You are not doomed to make the same mistakes that they made. People sometimes think when they're born into something that they're stuck in that spot and they're doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over. And we see that a lot with many generations that repeat the same mistakes as their ancestors. And Moshe is saying very loud and clearly, you are different because I just saw that you were different. So I'm not scared that you guys can't go into the land and conquer. I think this is going to be great. Yeshua is going to do a fantastic job. You're going to conquer the entire Eretz Canaan. I know you could do it because I just saw it. And this gives them the encouragement that they need to not get stuck in their history. And at this moment in time, when we're feeling this joy and this confidence that Bnei Israel could do it, and they made it, and they're not their parents, Moshe interjects and tells us something very personal. And he says, guys, I want you to know that right after this war happened, when we were all celebrating the conquest and things were really great, it's at that moment that I got down on my knees and I begged God to let me into the land. Maybe Moshe thought, hey, look, I could do it. I'm a great military leader. Look what I just did, God. I just conquered Sichon and Og. Let me go in. And how does God respond? Vayitzaber Adonai bi lemanchem velo shema alai vayomer Adonai alai ravlach al tosef daber alai od bedavar hazeh. God tells Moshe, shut up. That's what he says, ravlach, stop talking to me. Don't speak about this anymore. It's such a painful response when you think about this vulnerable place that Moshe is in, begging to go into the land. And God says, no. You could go up to the top of a mountain and you could see it. Ki lo tavor et hayarden hazeh. It's like, ouch. You aren't going to go in because you need to tell Yehoshua, ki hu yavor lefnei ha'am, v'hu yanchil otam et haaretz. Only Yehoshua has the leadership capabilities right now to do it. Moshe, you are not the right leader for this job. Moshe is sharing the most vulnerable situation that he's ever been in, and he's presenting himself as anything but divine, right? He's presenting himself as someone who God gets angry with. God almost like yells at him. God tells him, you're not the right person for the job. Only Yehoshua could do it. In a sense, one could say that Moshe's entire mission is a failure. Moshe's entire life has been to get the people into the promised land. And he can't do it. He can't cross that Yarden. He's stuck. It's so sad. I mean, like whenever I read these psukim, it's so emotional to think what Moshe is feeling right now. Perhaps Moshe wants them to know that it's not about the outcome, but it's about the process. It's not about crossing that Yarden, Maybe it's about what Moshe did to bring them to that point, to set them up. And that's what Sefer Devarim is about. It's about him setting them up to be in the right place. It doesn't matter who's actually going to cross that Jordan River. It's where they are psychologically and religiously. And that's what Moshe's job is. Perhaps also, Moshe needs them to know that he's not going into the promised land, not because he doesn't want to or he's scared, but because God won't let him. Lest anyone think for a moment that Moshe is afraid or feels like it can't be done. So he needs to reassure them over and over again. This is possible. You could do it. I'm sorry I can't go with you. I would if I could, but I can't. And the next text we're going to look at, which is the next parak, okay, is going to drive this point home even more. And I know we're running out of time already. There's so much text to go through. And this is when Moshe recounts the experience at Har Sinai. So hold on, this is a little dizzying, okay? If we're in a time machine right now, Moshe begins by talking about the second year in the Midbar. Then he jumps ahead to talk about what happened in the 40th year in the Midbar. And now he's jumping back in time again to talk about what happened in the second year in the Midbar, okay? So there's time travel happening. So now we're gonna go back again to what happened at Har Sinai. And I want you to see how Moshe spins the entire event, okay? And what he focuses on. He says to them, I'm starting on Pasuk Bet. Adonai Eloheinu karat imanu brit b'chorev. God made a covenant with us at Har Sinai. Lo et avotenu karat Adonai et brit hazot, not with your parents. Ki itanu, anachnu, elapo hayom, kulanu chayim. You, the guys who I'm speaking with right now, you were at Har Sinai. Now, were they actually at Har Sinai? No, right? This is the second generation, but he's speaking to them as if they were at Har Sinai. And he says, panim bipanim, face to face, diber Adonai imchem bahar mitoch esh. You saw God face to face. Do you recall where in this class we saw that same phrase, panim bipanim? I'm going to jump right back right now, okay? In my introduction, I'm going to jump back. Oh, hold on, and I went in the wrong direction, okay? To the narrator who gave us the end when Moshe died. And what did he say about Moshe? He says over here, Lo kam navi od b'Yisrael kama Moshe asher yado Adonai panim el panim. That's the phrase we always use when we talk about Moshe's special level, right, of intimacy with God. But here in our text, Moshe's using that language to talk about their relationship. You guys all had a divine revelation. You were there. And revelation wasn't a one-time event. Revelation is a constant unfolding event that happens to every generation. He then goes through the Aseret HaDibrot, which I cut out because we all know what they are. And then he tells them, when you heard the sounds of God from the Har, you came to me, V'tikrivun alai. Again, this is V'tikrivun, you came to me and you said to me, we can't handle it. Right? We're going to die. So I responded to you, right? And I went to God and he said, okay, Moshe, you are going to go and be the intermediary, right? The ata tidaber aleinu et kol asher dibar Adonai Eloheinu elecha v'shamanu v'asinu. And you agreed to this partnership. What Moshe is emphasizing here is that it was 100% their idea for Moshe to go up and get the Torah. And that maybe wasn't the ideal. Moshe didn't even wanted to have that job. It was only because of them. And I think what Moshe is saying in a very loud, clear voice is, I am not God's messenger to the people. I am the people's messenger to God. Right? And that is a really important message for them to hear. Moshe saying, I'm a hired civil servant. I'm just doing my job. You want me to do this? Great, I'm doing it. I wasn't looking for power. I wasn't looking for glory. I wasn't looking to be this, special messenger of God. No. It's all on you. And again, the focus on the partnership. Now, Chazal took a cue from Moshe. just like Moshe writes himself out of all these stories, Chazal write himself out of the Haggadah. We don't mention Moshe's name at the Seder night on Pesach, right? We do the exact same thing. We are following in Moshe's lead, listening to his voice and taking him out of the story. Imagine for a minute that you were a little kid standing at Arvot Moab in the 40th year, and this is your first chance. Maybe you've never heard Moshe give a speech before, and you're really excited, right? And you go and you listen to Moshe's speech. You would have absolutely no idea that Moshe ever had a revelation at a burning bush, that he managed to bring down the entire Egyptian empire, to defeat a Paro, take the people through Yam Suf, get the Torah. I mean, you would have none of this. The only takeaway that you would walk away from the speech is you would say, okay, Moshe, he's a good leader. I guess we hired a good guy. We chose the right person, right, to do this job. And it could have been anyone, right? And there are going to be lots of other Moshes in the future. Because what Moshe does is he makes the two most active characters in the story are Bnei Israel and Hashem. That's it. These are the two players that we're going to see throughout Sefer Devarim. And what we see here is one can almost say that this is an extreme level of humility, right? Almost like to the point of self-negation, where he takes himself out of the story. Like, I don't even know if this is healthy. I'm not sure, right? I don't want to do a psychological evaluation of Moshe, but it is really extreme, right? Why? Why is he doing this? Why is this so important for him? We've sort of been saying it the whole time, but does anyone want to try to at least wrap it up in a thought of what is Moshe trying to impart upon the people before he dies, before they embark on their new journey? What's his point?
They can do this without him.
Exactly. They don't need him.
He's
right?
going to die, and he's not the Jewish people. They can keep going.
And he's also putting forth this model of leadership, which is very democratic and egalitarian. And he's saying the best way to create this new future is not to go back to the mythical past of, like, miracles and supernatural things. No, it's just creating a system of egalitarian democracy. And that's going to become a major theme throughout Sefer Devarim. I think there's one more thing here. Okay, one more thing that Moshe is trying to do. And I sometimes I hesitate to do like a psychological evaluation of characters, but I really think that this might be true, that Moshe is also speaking from a point of trauma. Moshe was traumatized by what happened at Chet Ha'egel. And his biggest fear is, what happened, guys, the last time he went up to a mountain and didn't come down, right? He went up to a mountain for 40 days and he never returned, and they made Chet Ha'egel. And he's about to go up to another mountain and he will never come down this time. He's about to die and he knows he's going to go up that mountain. And he is so scared that they are going to repeat the same thing again, which is why we're going to see over and over again, he's going to say, don't make a pesel, don't make a pesel. He's always talking about this pesel. He's obsessed with it because he's traumatized. And that's going to be like an underlying psychology that's going to guide him.
Sarah, as you're talking, it makes me think, I'm speaking obviously very personally now. It makes me think of, I can't leave my kids alone for 2 minutes by themselves.
Right, exactly.
Because the little one will be like tied up with a rope around her by the time I get back.
Exactly.
And the others will be just running around with face paint on in a war mode.
Right.
But
that's actually the point is the opposite, that you need to empower your kids to do things without you.
Yeah,
to be civil
right. And I've never thought of it this way. That, well, you're saying empowering now, that's changing it for me. But just before you mentioned that, it's almost this fear that Moshe has of how these guys going to survive without me. They can't.
He's terrified.
I'm leading them. They can't do 40 days without me, and then everything's gone to hell. And now I'm going to be gone forever. How are these people going and you're opening up a whole new image of Moshe, of this stressed, anxious, ridden, fearful, almost pessimistic leader of, I don't know if you're going to be able to do this without me. That's really interesting. Very, very pessimistic, but really interesting approach.
But I would like to make a little optimistic, because the entire point is he keeps on saying, you could do it without me. I know you can. Like, I saw that you did. You're not your parents. You're not the same generation. You don't have to repeat the stories. Like, just like you guys aren't going to do Chet Meraglim, because I saw that you just conquered the land. Therefore, you're not going to do Chet Egel. I'm not so worried. We're in a different place right now. So I would say that the number one point of Sefer Devarim is just to give them that chizuk, that encouragement, that they could really do it without him. Now, Micha Goodman, who also wrote beautiful articles on Sefer Devarim and gave some amazing speeches at Tikva, also points something out that I want to bring in here, I would like to end with, is that Moshe's model of leadership is the antithesis of the Egyptian model of leadership. And Moshe is making himself out to be the anti-Paro, because in Egyptian culture, the Paro is the king and the god and the lawmaker and the everything wrapped up into one. There's a dynasty, right? So like no one has to wonder who the next leader is going to be. You don't have to empower anyone or pass it on. Okay. The Paros were worshipped in life as much as in death. Even after they died, they were held to be gods and they were mummified. And this culture, this cult of death meant that they lived forever. And Moshe is basically saying, no, there's no dynasty here. I'm passing this on to Yehoshua, and he's not my child. We actually don't know anything about Moshe's children. And his body, well, that's going to be buried in a very mysterious place. You can't worship his body. We don't know where it is. And while Moshe's body might have vanished, he lived on in a much more profound way than Paro could ever have imagined, which is through his words, through this speech. This is his last will and testament. And he's basically saying, and Mark, this goes to what you were just saying right now. Yes, I'm going to die, and I'm scared people are going to freak out without me, but I'm leaving you with this book, with this Torah. This is going to be the answer. This is how I will forever be immortal. I'm going to be with you forever on every journey you go through, because you just have to follow this book that I'm leaving you, this speech. And that is really profound, because here we are today studying that speech, right? Moshe indeed has lived on, and who knows where Paro is. And, whoever this narrator is absolutely brilliant for framing the speech in this sense and for giving us this text that we could refer to with all this ancient wisdom. So that wraps it up for today. That has been an hour. We have now finished the entire first section. We went through the first 4 prakim in Sefer Devarim, and I think that we've actually touched upon every major theme that we're now going to see throughout Devarim, which is, right, the transfer of power, setting up this just society and ethical society that Moshe wants to do, and the fear that he's living with, but also the encouragement and motivation that he's given them in order to move on without him. So thank you. Do I have any questions, any comments? I see there's a chat.
Was excellent. Very, very well structured. You're a native pedagogue.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was very kind.
Isn't that exactly what I told you, Peter, in my introduction of Sara?
Yeah, maybe you got it right.
I appreciate that.
Sara is
Thank
an
you.
amazing teacher, and I think everyone who was just a part of this class will agree. Just takes you by the hand and leads you to an incredible journey. And my goodness, Sara, thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you guys.
amazing.
I look forward to next class.
That was amazing. I can't wait already till next Thursday. Friends, if you should know anyone that you would like to join this class, bring them along with you. I think that this is some of the highest learning that we've been doing this year, and it's really worthy of your friends joining as well. So please encourage people. This was fabulous. Sara, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you
And
very much.
I will wish everybody an early Shabbat Shalom. And thank you so much. We're looking forward, Sarah, to continuing next Thursday.
Lovely.
I just
Looking
want
forward, guys.
to I just want to add that we do have we have a recording of this, and also Sarah has very kindly shared her PDF with us as well. So I can send that out to you in an email if you would like.